You've probably heard of suspension dampers, hydraulic disc brakes, flex stays and tyre rubber compounds.
But what about the mountain bike tech that isn't so common?
We've uncovered 5 high-tech things that you might not have heard of.
But might be coming to a mountain bike near you soon.
Mountain bikes are oozing with the coolest tech going. Just think about your suspension forks, hydraulic dampers that control everything from your low speed and high speed compression and rebound damping. There's even special coatings to help reduce friction.
Or look at your tyres, you've got multiple compounds, radial sidewalls, different constructions, puncture protection, all sorts of stuff. And of course, loads of different tread patterns too. Very complicated things, but we're all used to seeing them. But there's a whole host of technology out there. Some of it's for race bikes, some of it's for normal bikes, but it's all available to buy if you have to have the latest and greatest tech.
And that is what we're going to talk about today. Okay, Tom, let's start with tuned mass dampers. What are they?
They're very simple things in theory. They're usually like a cylindrical tube with a weight inside that's sort of sprung between 2 springs, top and bottom. Obviously, they're a little bit more complicated than that. It's technology that we've seen on Formula 1 cars, for example.
Okay.
And the idea of a tuned mass damper is to quickly reduce oscillations in a structure to bring it back to a steady state.
Okay.
Okay. So you see it, for example, in really tall buildings. When you have an earthquake, buildings wave like that, and quite often the biggest skyscrapers will have a tuned mass damper at the top. And they counteract the sway of the building to bring it back stable so that you don't fall over and your vase doesn't fall off a shelf, right?
Sure.
Nobody likes an earthquake.
No one does like an earthquake.
So when, so you've got your TMD or your tuned mass damper, it's attached to a structure. When that structure moves, because of sort of inertia, that weight moves in the opposite direction. And then the spring pushes it back at the same sort of oscillation frequency as the building moves back. And when you have these two sort of counteracting forces, it brings everything back to stability quickly and easily. The idea of this is to reduce fatigue because it smooths everything out. It increases control because you're not bumping all over the place, and also can improve things like handling because, again, the bike isn't bumping over ground, which at that point might not be bumpy. So we're seeing it increasingly on downhill bikes.
Yep.
Ronan Dunn's been running them, various other teams, and they seem to mount them in various places on the bike. So you see them bolted to the top stanchions of a downhill fork at the front. We've seen them on the frame lower down, and we've also seen them on rear triangles. And the theory, as I say, is to sort of bring everything back to that sort of stability nice and quickly.
So just to smooth out that vibration.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I say increase control. So there has been a bit of research on these. So there's a company called Countershocks that make them. And they say that the reduction in force through the bars from a rider who's using one of their products is around 20% less force is exerted through the bars. So that's a reduction in the amount of energy that the rider has having to put into their riding, which in theory can reduce that fatigue. So it's about a 500 gram sort of weight that is in this tube, depending on where it's mounted. And there are obviously a couple of options out there. Countershocks, as mentioned, they have a tube that you bolt onto, I think is the fork stanchion or above the brace.
Yep.
Rimpact have just announced one, and that slots into the steerer tube of your bike. Again, that's at the front of the bike. Fox apparently have a patent for one which has an adjustable or tunable frequency. So the frequency is about 8 to 10 hertz, so 8 to 10 movements per second. And yeah, Fox apparently have a patent to bring one out that is adjustable.
On a mountain bike, each track's going to be quite different.
Yeah.
Therefore, potentially not tuning it might mean you're not optimizing it as well as you could have.
Yeah. And I think this is where maybe in the future, maybe that Fox patent will become more useful. And I'm sure there is an effect, but I'm not sure how great an effect it is. So I figure if you're racing World Cup downhill and you're super fast, maybe you are Ronan Dunn, maybe it will have an impact that is useful. Will it have an impact for the normal person, the average guy on a bike or a guy or girl on a bike? It probably will. Is it that noticeable? I'm not sure.
I guess Loris Vergier, I think he was running one down by his bottom bracket.
Yep.
So worst case, even if it doesn't do exactly what it's there to be designed to do, you're still adding weight down low, which is probably no bad thing on a downhill bike.
Yep.
Add in 500 grams as low as possible, exactly where you need it, is only going to better probably suspension performance and improve your traction, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of people do that on the downhill scene. If you look at any tech gallery from the races, there's always someone who's zip-tied a bit of lead. I mean, this is a slightly fancier version of a bit of lead. and it is designed to sort of exacerbate the impact of that. Okay, so that's kind of what a tune mass damper is. Do you want it on your bike?
Maybe if I was racing downhill, but I'm not. So no, I'm not on my trail bike, thanks.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Cool.
Right, next up, similar vein, steering dampers.
Yes. So steering dampers, much like a tune mass damper, is designed to make the riding experience a little bit smoother, a little bit less fatiguing, and give you a little bit more control. Now, there are various types of steering damper. There are hydraulic dampers, which sort of bolt onto your head tube and your steerer tube. There are headsets like a Visco set, which sort of aren't quite as free and easy to move. And there is Canyon's KISS system,
Which isn't a damper.
which isn't a damper, don't know in the comments, but it kind of performs a similar-ish job.
Stabilizer.
Stabilizer, steering stabilizer.
Yeah, that's right.
So the point of a steering damper really is to tune out the sort of the chatter that will make its way to the end of the handlebars, tune out that vibration, and also offer you a bit more stability. If you're going flat out fast down a rocky track, you want your wheels to be going where they want to be going, not getting knocked offline. So a damper is there to sort of kind of help keep that front wheel going where you want it to be going. So there are a few out there, as mentioned. The hydraulic ones are kind of, well, the Hopi steering damper was a product that's been around for a long time. Yeah. Now, a few years ago, a guy called Jeremiah Bubar, who, and I've heard you mention his name a few times, he's worked at the likes of Cannondale and RockShox. He bought the IP, the intellectual property, and he has brought one to market recently.
The Padamelon?
There's a Padamelon, yeah, it's just some sort of weird little animal that lives in the jungle, I think. And also a steering damper.
And also a steering wheel, yeah.
And it uses sort of like a hydraulic vein thing. So the bigger the movement, these veins move out into the hydraulic fluid, which slows things down. Like if you're in a swimming pool, right, and you stand like this, you just twist around, you can twist around. If you stick your arms out, it slows you down when you're in a swimming pool. That's the theory. And they're adjustable as well. You can adjust how sort of where those veins sort of sit effectively. They're basically meant to calm everything down.
We see them on motorbikes a lot.
Yes.
Understandably, because the speeds are so high, and I guess if you're dealing with those sorts of movements, you don't want it to just sort of
Snap.
Yeah, exactly.
And those, you know, those high frequency chattery things, isn't it? So I've got a Visco set on my gravel bike. So this is where the bearing in your headset is smooth, but it takes a bit more force for it to move. It's not much more, especially when you've got the leverage on there, but it does really help tune out those little frequencies. So on a gravel bike, it's really noticeable.
Yeah.
When you jump back and forth, you kind of get used to it.
Yeah.
But it does make a difference on, you know, fast gravel with narrow tires. Extrapolate that out to a mountain bike, wider bars, bigger hits, bigger tires. And I can see why they're going to be kind of useful, interesting things, especially if you're racing enduro.
See, I quite like the KISS system. It's basically two springs attached to like an offset cam, which then it kind of just corrects itself, pulls it back to center. And it takes a little bit of getting used to. But when you're riding really fast, chattery turns, where you tend to get quite a bit of feedback through the bars, it really calms things down.
Yeah.
It is really, you know, creating that connection between front and back wheels to a degree. And I actually really liked it. I really appreciate having it on there. But again, it's not until you switch back and forth, because you do get used to it.
Yeah.
And it does make a noticeable difference. But yeah, there is a bit of adaptation time, but it does bring some benefits, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these systems, they say that the maximum sort of corrective force, or like either the most resistance, or with the KISS system, the most pullback, the self-right system, is in those earlier bits of the handlebar. And then when you're doing those big movements where, you know, you come into a tight switchback or something and you don't really want that resistance, the resistance tapers off the further round you get, which is kind of helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
But the KISS system, yeah, interesting. It's adjustable. You get it on Lightville's and Canyons built by Syntace. I guess if you were, say you're going to go off a big jumper and pull a no-hander, so that you would kind of make sure your bars are a bit straight, which is also something I do massively. A lot of no-handers, yeah.
All the time.
But yeah, an interesting system.
We talked about descending, but what about the effects steering dampers would have on climbs?
I mean, it's probably not quite as shouted about. And, you know, obviously a lot of them are designed around downhill and enduro riding, so maybe the climb performance isn't quite so sort of useful. But you know, when you're riding up a real steep climb and your front wheel's a little bit unweighted and it can start, you know, drifting all over the earth, and you've got to like hunker down and really like keep going. A steering damper or the KISS system, for example, can help keep that sort of front wheel going where you want it to. I've ridden the KISS system. I've not ridden a damper personally. I'd quite like to, but I've ridden the KISS system a bit And one of the things they say is that it gives you this connection between the front and the rear contact patches, the two tyre contact patches. And you sort of listen to it and think, oh, that sounds like a load of rubbish. But every now and again, when I was riding it, you just like, you drop into a corner, a little bit of bar, sort of turn, and like, you just go, rap. Beautiful.
Yeah.
It did work.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of positives to be had from it.
Yeah.
Okay, you seem quite into it. So would you have one on your bike?
Having ridden a Visco set on my gravel bike, I would definitely be intrigued to try a damper
Okay.
on my trail, longer travel trail bike, enduro bike sort of thing. Yes, I think that is legs in it. They look a bit weird because they're sort of quite bulky at the moment, certainly. But I, for sure, yeah, I'm keen to have one.
Nice. Okay, tech you'd have.
That is tech I would have.
Let's stick with keeping things calm and talk about drivetrains.
So the next item is one that is probably the most commonly seen of all of the items in this list.
Okay.
I don't really know what the technical term is, a chain damper maybe?
Yeah.
But basically we're talking about O-chains, which is a product, and Rimpax chain damper. So these are chain rings that bolt onto your cranks and offer a bit of isolation between the chain pull from an extending chainstay length and your cranks.
Yep.
So when the suspension moves through its travel, unless the main pivot is concentric to the bottom bracket, there will always be a slight change in length of the chainstay, the distance between the rear axle and the stem of the cranks. And when it extends, what happens is the top of the chain pulls back on the chainring, and you can feel it through the pedals. So you might land a drop and you feel like a little kick. It's called pedal kickback. So you can feel it. It might sort of add to a feeling of harshness or sort of less smoothness.
Okay.
Technical term.
Yeah.
But it also can have an impact on your suspension. The idea of like the O-chain, for example, or the chain damper is to disconnect that a little bit by having a chain ring that can move slightly on the crank.
Yep.
So when the chain pulls back, the chain ring moves a little bit, takes out that sort of the harshness of that impact, that tug, and everything is a little bit smoother.
And we should probably also mention the E13 sidekick hub as well.
Yes.
Because that kind of works in a very similar way, but it's in your hub. So you're at the root cause almost rather than the other end, right?
They have benefits in terms of smoothness, and I know we've tested a few at MBUK Bike Radar, and with good effect. They do sort of reduce chatter, they keep things a little bit smoother, a little bit quiet as well, because they can also help prevent a little bit of chain slap. They add a little bit of weight and a little bit of complexity.
There's a bit of lag as well, I would imagine, right?
There can be. So when you're, when you climb technical stuff and you might want to like ratchet on the cranks a little bit, just sort of like get around a tight turn or sort of make sure you're not getting a crank strike. Because there is that movement in the chainring, you get that little feeling of softness until whether it's a spring on the Rimpact or the elastomer on the O-chain, until that sort of bottoms out. And then you've got like
engages,
the full engagement. But it can give that little feeling of softness. And again, like you're suddenly doing a little sprint, you'll just feel that little bit of lethargy in there until it bottoms out, and then it's fine. Interesting things. Now the O-chain, that is adjustable. So I think it's between 4 and 12 degrees.
Okay.
And that's based on elastomers. So you change the elastomers and it'll sort of adjust.
Got it.
And I think the Rimpact isn't adjustable.
Okay.
But they look kind of cool. We do see them a lot in downhill racing.
Everywhere. Absolutely everywhere.
So I think they're, interesting bits.
Agreed. And I think there are some riders out there that I've spoken to on the World Cup circuit who have been riding both the E13 hub and O-chain simultaneously, just to try to really mute any of those vibrations, any pedal feedback.
Yeah, a smooth bike is a fast bike.
They say.
Which obviously links in with the previous two items.
There you go.
They're all there about reducing vibrations, reducing fatigue, reducing sort of chatter and everything to make you go a bit faster.
Potentially increasing grip as well.
Yeah.
Which if you're trying to ride fast, having grip is essential.
Yeah, because anything that sort of interferes with your suspension's movement, like a bit of chain tug will impact on grip and performance in general of the suspension.
Exactly.
Would you have one on your bike?
I have the E13 hub on right now.
Do you like it?
I do. Yeah, it does genuinely make a noticeable difference. It's on a relatively short travel bike, where I think it maybe almost has more of an effect.
Yeah.
just because it means I can ride my usual sort of enduro style tracks as fast as I possibly can, but without getting absolutely beaten up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say it makes a difference. Right, let's move on to some car tech that we've seen on bikes. Now, most cars nowadays are going to have ABS braking.
Yes.
What is that and where would we see it?
Okay, so ABS, anti-lock brake system, is a technology to prevent your wheel from locking up when you're heavily braking.
Why is that bad?
I mean, if you're skidding, let's talk about cars. If you're skidding, you do not have appropriate traction for the control that you need, okay? If you're skidding, your tire is not controlling your movement properly. You get better slowing down when your wheel is rotating rather than not rotating. So the idea of an ABS system on a bike is to improve braking in extreme conditions, okay? So there have been versions in the past that have been released, but basically the only one really on the market now, or the one that's sort of making waves, I guess, is Bosch's system, which is in a collaboration with Gearboxes and is hardwired into specific Bosch-powered e-bikes. A lot of the bikes that it's coming on are more trekking bikes, urban bikes, but they have released it on a number of mountain bikes, and the goal is to improve braking performance on steep, loose terrain. So the way it works is moderately complex, but in theory quite simple. So there is sensors on your front and back wheel, which sort of can tell the system whether your wheel is rotating or whether it's stationary, skidding. And then this sort of is fed back into the brain. The brain encases your hydraulic brake line and interferes with it. So if the system realizes that your front wheel is not moving, it will release a little bit of pressure in the hydraulic line and allow that front wheel to move a bit. Now there are sensors on the back wheel as well, so if it notices, for example, that your rear wheel is up in the air or something, it will predict that you're braking too hard on the front, and it will just release a little bit of pressure just to keep that front wheel moving, keep it rolling, keep it in traction, and in theory, improve your braking.
In theory. So why did you say in theory? This makes me worried.
Now, I've read mixed reports.
Yeah, I mean, Al's just had a bike with ABS on, hasn't he?
He wasn't a fan, but I've read reports from other places where people are a fan. So I guess it's probably one of those technologies that's going to take a little bit of getting used to, a bit of riding to sort of really work out where it does and doesn't work. I think sort of part of it is that the problems Al had was that when he was going down really steep, loose stuff where he needed to like lose a lot of speed quickly for some of the corners that he was riding in the Tweed Valley, because the brake reduces the power going to the front wheel, you're kind of like, where's my braking point? It was back there, because you can't slow down as fast as you might have done so.
So it's almost undoing those habits in order to relearn how this new system works.
I suspect that if you are newer to mountain biking,
maybe there's more benefits.
It might be a good bit of tech. One thing, when you go riding with friends who haven't mountain bike before, one thing people are terrified of, understandably, is jamming on a load of front brake and out the front, right? And in theory, an ABS system shouldn't allow you to do that. However, I think when you progress and you learn better techniques, when you learn how bikes ride and are better controlled, actually having the ability to, if you want, lock up is no bad thing. And I think having that interference at the very least with your braking is something that I would find particularly unnerving.
I agree. I completely agree. I think there's a lot of habits being learned over the however many years we've been doing this, but those habits lead you to being able to ride in a certain way, if that makes sense. So if you need to jab the brake, especially the new brakes, which are so powerful, so it doesn't take a lot just to lock them up to make a turn slightly tighter, or to, like you're saying, really scrub off speed super fast, just drop those heels and just pull the anchors on, and you really slow it. Whereas it sounds like when Al was riding those, he would kind of ride in that old way, and then he'd be like, oh, I can't actually slow down for this turn. What's going on? I'm not going to make it. Which sounds quite disconcerting to me.
I guess especially is that, they're built into e-bikes. E-bikes tend to be quite heavy, and, when I've ridden e-bikes, especially the big full power ones, your braking points are different anyway, and the action levels are different in good and bad ways. I think adding to all of that, for me, sounds slightly terrifying. The other interesting thing is you get sort of like a little juddery feeling, because it's a very fast
pulsates, right?
Pulsating, because like the systems that regulate the pressure through the hydraulic line for the front brake, and it's not on the back brake, it's only on the front brake, it can work to quite a fast hertz, much faster than maybe your brain can. You get that like...
Well, you can feel it in your car, can't you?
Yeah, you can, yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm going to pass.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to have it, but I think back to your original point on urban stuff, it makes a lot more sense because it means the tyres can do exactly what it needs to do.
Yeah.
Tyres aren't good at multitasking. We know that. So if they can keep moving, they can keep gripping.
Like you say, that's a good application. And I think there is, this is a bit of tech I would like to see on a wide range of bikes. Just keep it away from my mountain bike.
Right, we're going to stick with e-bikes for now because it's something we've seen on a few of late. Auto shifting, co-shift, auto shift.
Yeah.
What's all that about?
So this is both SRAM and Shimano have these systems. Obviously they both are the dominant drivetrain systems. They also both have their own motor systems for e-bikes. And auto shift systems basically allow the bike to pick the gear for you. So you can ride along without touching a shifter, and the system integrated with the gears and the motor will analyze what's going on with your cadence, your power, the amount of torque you're putting through, and then select the correct gear for what you're doing. Kind of cool in theory, right?
I think so, yeah. I know when we've put reviews out with this stuff on, people have been up in arms about the bikes just doing everything for us. But once you ride it, it's actually, it's quite novel. It's quite fun. You can obviously kind of trick it to a degree. If you are bombing down something super fast, so you're not pedaling. So it's just like, oh, okay, well, maybe you're going really, really quick and you need to be in a hard gear. And then you come to a really steep pitch and then it just can't keep on. You're like, it's a bit quirky then.
So that's because it's a reactive system, not a proactive system.
Right.
It doesn't know what's coming up.
Of course not.
You do, because you got your eyes, right? But the system, they don't know that. So
sometimes I ride with my eyes shut, but sure.
When you're scared.
Yes.
But basically what happens, when you start going up a hill, your cadence drops and your torque automatically increases. And at that point, it will then shift the gear for you. When you're going a little bit faster, they may shift up the coast because your cadence increases and it will try and keep you in the ideal cadence band. The benefit of that in many respects is with these e-bike motors, many of them have an ideal cadence for them to deliver their performance optimally.
Yeah, it's like a cadence window, isn't it? To make sure you're getting the maximum amount of power and torque out of it all the time, rather than having to kind of work it out yourself. It's going to try and shift those gears to ensure you're in that.
So I use the Shimano system and they call it auto shift. Strom also call it auto shift.
They do.
Really handy. I used it recently on a launch for the first time. And I think I went about 100 meters and turned it off. It wasn't for me. Well,
that's fair. So I used the SRAM one and I left it on. I tuned it though, so they have it's tunable, so you can kind of select how long you'd stay in a gear before it changes. But I had it so I would stay in a gear for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So then I could kind of spin in that gear and then it would change as in when it felt like it needed to. And I'm not desperate for it. I'm not going to go and, make sure I have to have a bike with it on. But it's cool to see these developments, these innovations happen. And I quite liked the co-shift.
Yes.
So that's a cool thing that you can only really do on e-bikes, right? Because you need to have that free hub in the motor.
Yep.
So the chainwheel can continue to turn while your cranks are set, and you can just select the gear and it'll change it for you while you're coasting.
Still rolling.
Which is quite cool.
Free shift, it's called on Shimano.
Okay.
Similar thing. And like you say, so you can be going down that steep hill, you know that there's a steep ascent coming, and while you're not pedaling, just jam it down a few gears, and you're in the right gear for when you hit that little climb. Because
how many times do you coast down a bit of trail knowing what's coming up and you kind of soft pedal just to try to make sure you're in an appropriate gear to kind of get up the next bit?
I think it's going to be really interesting for racers. If you're e-bike racing, for example, we talked about it with downhill stuff with gearboxes, which we're going to talk about in a second. But those guys, when they've got a gearbox, is that they can pre-select the gear they want to be in for the next hard pedaling section. And you should be able to do that again with co-shift or with free shift. Now, obviously with auto shift, there is an override. You can override what it's doing. But I guess in theory, it's there to make your life a little bit easier so you can concentrate on having fun on your bike without having to think about shifting.
And again, it's one of those things that if you don't want it, you can either switch it off or you just don't buy the bike that has it, right?
Yeah.
Simple as that. So it's a cool innovation and who knows where it will lead. I think I said a long time ago about whether you could link it to a GPX file so it knows what's coming up. It knows the contours, the lumps and bumps, and therefore it'll be able to kind of map your gearing.
Yeah.
for you.
If the data is that granular, then it could then be proactive rather than reactive.
Who knows? But I mean, I guess that is taking a lot of control out of your hands, quite literally out of your hands. Are you having it?
Nah.
I think I'll pass for now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, finally, last one. It's a biggie and it's very important for this year in particular, gearboxes.
Yes. Gearbox. So I've been mountain biking 25-ish years.
So you're really old.
I'm very old. Past it. And I reckon for at least 20 of those years, gearboxes have been touted as the next greatest thing to revolutionize mountain biking, and it hasn't happened yet. But, you know, things come and go, but this year is a big one for gearboxes. Obviously, the downhill world has taken them on a little bit for various reasons, and gearboxes could be the next big thing.
And you just did a bike check on the Geometron G1, which uses a pinion gearbox.
Yeah, the Geometron G1 GPI uses, the GPI is the gearbox bit.
Right.
Yeah, uses pinion C12I something or other, which is the 12-speed gearbox from pinion. So there have been various gearbox systems for many years. Rollhoff in the rear hub, been around for a long time. It's a 14-speed system. Shimano's had the Alfie, which again was kind of popular with mountain bikes 10 years ago, that sort of thing, and obviously has like use in the commuter market a fair bit. We had the wonderfully named trivative Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
which was a 2-speed crank-based thing, kind of precursor to where we are now in some respects.
It was actually pretty good. I mean, I know there was a bit of drag in there, but for what it did at the time, it was actually really cool.
Pretty cool. Got rid of the front neck and meant you had a 2-speed 2x10, I guess it would have been back there.
Loads of ground clearance.
All the ground clearance.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's things like FE gear at the moment. The pinion is probably the most notable of those around at the moment. So what is the point? Well, the nice thing about a gearbox is, yes, they're quite heavy, as you alluded to, but that weight sits low and central in the bike, and it isn't hanging off the rear triangle.
So you can't smash a rear derailleur off.
You can't smash a rear derailleur off.
Because there isn't one.
Because there isn't one. But you do, and you also benefit from the whole unsprung to sprung ratio.
Yes.
Now this is a topic that we did talk about with Sam Robson from Geometron in that bike check video a little bit, and he's probably far more qualified to talk about it with me. But basically, anything that moves with the rear wheel over a bump, the lighter that is, the easier it is for that to move.
The more sensitive it can be.
The more sensitive it can be. So if you can move weight to the sprung section of your bike, which is anything that is insulated from the ground by your suspension, that is where the weight is best placed, because that ratio, improving the ratio, increasing the weight that is sprung, just makes the whole bike feel smoother. It's why e-bikes feel so good.
Right, it's why those e-bikes feel like the suspension you're just getting. It doesn't matter how cheap the suspension dampers are, it feels like you've had an upgrade for free.
So your gearbox improves that ratio, reduces the risk of smashing anything on your back wheel. They're reliable because they're a self-contained unit, often with an oil bath. So the gears that are inside those boxes are continuously being lubricated, and there's no dirt getting in there, so they don't wear out quite so fast. You have a perfect chain line because there's only one chain ring, there's only one sprocket, so the chain is perfectly straight.
Or belt.
Or belt. So your chain isn't being bent all over the place. Which has other connotations, as we talked about with the Geometron G1 GPI. It means that there is a constant anti-squat, so the suspension kinematics are a constant rather than when you change gear, it changes how the chain interacts with the suspension, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of benefits.
There is. So there are some drawbacks as well though, right?
Yeah.
So why is it's taken so long for us to see them sort of come to light now? Well, not come to light, I guess, become a bit more popular.
I think there are a couple of reasons why we're seeing more of them now. One, e-bikes are a big thing, okay? And we have come to, maybe as a collective group of mountain bikers, realize that a little bit of extra weight can help with performance on the trail. You know, traction, smoothness, stability. It's actually not that bad. So the additional weight of a gearbox, before we'd be like, oh God, I don't want to add 2 kilos to my bike. Now you think, well, actually, a couple of kilos here might help the bike ride better down a hill. The other thing that I think is pertinent with the pinion system is that smart shift.
So that's a big thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So previously, gearboxes tended to be cable pulled, and because there's no release spring, you needed 2 cables going to them, and there's a pull and a pull, usually with a grip shift style shifter, which people didn't particularly like. and they were also quite tricky to shift under power.
Yeah, you had to kind of soft pedal, make the shift, then continue.
Yeah, you could of course pedal when you could shift when you're not pedaling.
Yep.
But that shifting under power was never great. But the smart shift from pinion, it motorizes it, which makes it a bit easier, and it also can time the shift when your pedals are at the 12 and 6 position if you're putting a lot of power through the pedals,
Right.
which is the least powerful bit of your pedal stroke and makes that shift pretty quick and instant. And obviously you're not pulling a cable through, or two cables through some outers, so the shifting feel is much improved.
Okay, so, I mean, I guess we're not going to see them move to XC bikes anytime soon because they're still probably not going to be as efficient as a derailleur and cassette chainring setup, right?
Yeah, there is an efficiency loss. Depending on who you speak to and when you speak to them, there's different percentages. But generally speaking, a clean, mechanical, normal drivetrain is fairly much, 98, 99% efficient in terms of the amount of power you put through the crank to get to the rear wheel. With a gearbox, you're losing a few percent on that. I think around 94% is what I've read. Gearbox enthusiasts will say that they wear in over time, and they do feel better. I actually had a roll huff while I was at uni. For 4 years, I rode that damn thing up hills, and it made me hate my life a lot of the time. So the problem, okay, so this is maybe where we get a little bit more technical. And I don't really understand how planetary gear systems particularly work, but you tend to have a few sets of gears that sort of give you, I think with a pinion, it's 4 gears, which then tag into 3 bigger gears, into an overdrive or an underdrive. So you've got 2 sets of gears working within 2 sets of gears, if that makes kind of sense. And that is where the inefficiency comes from. That's where sort of the feel through the cranks can feel a little bit mechanical. With the roll huff, it was 2 sets of 7, but the lower 7 gears were in this overdrive gear, which added a layer of inefficiency, which made everything feel a little bit more super when you're going up those long alpine climbs that I, for some reason, quite enjoyed doing at the time. It just made everything feel a bit hard work. But those inefficiencies still exist in the gearbox today. That's why I don't think you'll see it in cross-country race bikes anytime soon. But on a downhill bike, there are those advantages. Centralized weight, low and central, good for the suspension, super reliable, not smashing a mech, shift when you're in the air, ready for the next section. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens this year with downhill racing.
Are you going to get one, if you could?
I had a little pedal on that G1 GPI, and actually in its bottom gear, it felt all right. Okay, it does feel a little bit more mechanical. I think there are lots of advantages to it, and I would be intrigued to try one, maybe next year's long-term bike, if I was going for something longer travel.
Thank you, Tom. That was truly insightful. Now, what tech do you want to see in your bikes in the future? Please let us know in the comments below.
If you want to see a video of us checking out the Atherton A200G pinion-driven downhill bike, that's on screen, along with a link to our wrecked and rated playlist for a full set of reviews on the channel.
Thank you and goodbye.